to share with you a little bit about typography today. So, typography is essentially the art of arranging letters in text in order to make it clear, legible, and visually appealing. So, essentially, the goal of typography is to really accurately articulate and communicate an idea. And hold on to that word accurately, because we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But essentially to make sure that whatever information that's given is readable and it's legible and that it makes sense. So one thing that you need to consider when you're thinking about typography or how you arrange your letters or text is the contrast. So it's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So if you notice this is way too much contrast. If you stare at it for a while, it's actually going to create a color vibration and it's going to hurt your eyes. Notice how this is really, really, really bad typography. It is challenging to read. There is way too much contrast, and the typeface that was chosen, it's actually just hard to read in general. Not to mention the kerning, which we'll get into a little bit later, is really tight, which means the letters themselves are really, really close together. This is another example of some bad typography choices, but this time there's too little contrast. And because there's too little contrast, again, it is hard to read. The whole goal of typography is to make sure that it is legible and easy to read. So in both of these cases, it's challenging to read, so it's not good typography. Too little contrast. Another thing that is important when we think of typography is making sure that the type that we are choosing makes sense with the message. So for instance, this almost screams calm and quiet. It's calm and quiet. It's very loud. It's very aggressive. The type that's chosen does not make sense with what is being written. This also feels almost panicky now. Calm and quiet, instead of something like this, which actually feels calm and quiet. Notice how they all say the same thing. They all read calm and quiet, but how they read is very different. This versus this says something else. So something as simple as notice how they are the same typeface, they are the same font, but look at how these are spaced. That simple spacing of the letters makes it feel more vast. It makes sense how the letters themselves are arranged makes sense with the words. So I'm going to shift my face cam over here. So the typeface itself talks just as much and it says just as much as the words do. And that's something that great graphic designers know and understand. Making sure that your design says the same thing that your content does. So if we were to go back, this doesn't say the same thing as the content. This says these type choices say the same thing as our content does. So for instance, this doesn't look very official just because of the typeface that is used, because it doesn't have the same level of officialness, for lack of better words. Notice how this one feels more official because of the typeface that is chosen. So there's a ton that goes into typography. Like we can talk about serifs and ascenders and apexes and shoulders and breaks and all that different type of stuff. Actually, there's a huge amount of anatomy that goes into each letter, which is super interesting, but we're not going to get into that. We're going to make it a little bit easier. But what we will do is we're going to hit intro level. We're going to first talk about typefaces versus fonts. We use font all the time because anytime where we're picking a font in, for instance, Microsoft Office or Google Docs, when you choose something, it says choose font. So actually, typeface is what you're choosing. Typeface refers to a family of different fonts. So Times New Roman is a typeface. But Times New Roman bold or Times New Roman italic is a font. A font refers to a really, really specific weight, width, and style of a typeface. So Times New Roman bold italic is a font. Comic Sans bold is a font, but Comic Sans is a typeface. So take a look at these different fonts. So Arial narrow, Arial regular, Arial italic, Arial bold, all of those are fonts, but Arial is a typeface. The weight itself, I'm going to shift this. The term weight refers to how kind of, for lack of better words, bold something is. I keep moving my face cam. All right, serif refers to basically the little dashes that will sit on top or beneath a letter. They're the little embellishments. So serif or sans serif. Sans meaning without a serif. The kerning refers to the spacing that happens in between each letter, versus the tracking is the spacing that happens over the entire word or group of letters. So this is something to consider. Letters that are spaced too tightly or are tracked too tightly over the words make it really challenging to read. In the same sense, letters that are spaced too loosely with too much space in between also impair the legibility. And again, the whole goal of this thing, this typography, is to make sure that it is easy to read. This is not so good kerning. Notice how the R and the N are too close together, and they actually start to make an M. So that is bad kerning. You're going to notice now if you go to a store, or actually if you open up your cabinets, you'll probably notice examples of bad kerning. So notice how this is a weird space in between the R and the A. And notice how there should be a little bit more of a space between the L and the I. If you were to, for instance, just Google bad kerning, you're going to see a lot of really bad examples of why kerning is so important. Oops, I'll move my face again. Again, bad kerning. Notice this odd space. It's a little bit too much space in between the letters T and O. While this example for the London buses really needs a little bit more kerning. Notice how close the letter P and L are together, or S and T are together, and B and R are together. It looks unprofessional. A lot of times when you're typing, depending on the typeface itself, you might have to go in and manually kern or to fix that, and I'll show you guys how to do that later.